Welcome to the first of our London Market vlogs tied to our biannual London Market survey published earlier this year. Today we are shining a light on one of the key themes that came out, and that's digital transformation and data trends in the London market. And I'm really pleased to have with us here today Paolo Cuomo, Director of Operations at Brit, David Blackwell, our partner in our data analytics and architecture team, Sahil Khanna from our digital capability team, and Adam from our insurance team. I just wanted to welcome you all. Thank you for making the time, and really excited to hear from you, both from a London market industry and particularly at Brit, what we are seeing on digital and data innovation, and also to hear from our Beringa capability leads on what we are seeing outside industry. So thank you for joining. Paolo, if I can ask you, one of the trends that we're seeing is that COVID has accelerated the digital adoption and transformation in the London markets. And what has then been the real value for you at Brit in the transition to digital? What are the shifts and trends you are seeing that you anticipate will be here to stay?
Thanks, Christine. Yes, it's interesting, of course, because I think in the context of any survey that's being done right now, everyone's absolutely answering, oh yes, digital transformation front of our agenda, etc. I'm more cynical, should we say, and I'll talk generally, then I'll give you some sense into Brit. I think that everyone's now talking about digital transformation because we've spent the past 18 months in this peculiar world, and technology has been so much more central. But in reality, pretty much everyone in the London market is still using Teams exactly as they were 12 or 18 months ago. I think the only reason people have stopped printing documents is they suddenly realized, how expensive it is if you're paying for your own ink. And I think, everyone who says, oh, but relationships online, actually it's worked just fine. The people saying that are those who've had the relationships for 10 or 20 years. And you know what? It's really quite easy to continue a relationship online. And, you've got sort of less experienced, more junior people who are really struggling to build relationships online in a way that would. So, it's all very easy to say, absolutely digital transformation, but the reality is how much have we had to change, compared to a restaurant owner or a personal trainer or someone who used to sell handmade jewelry on a market stand. They have genuinely had to innovate in order for their businesses, their lives, frankly, to continue to work. Most of us haven't, and I think if you really look at the COVID sort of triggered digital transformation, probably the only area that's meaningfully changed maybe will be around some of our claims. I think there's been some real acceleration of some of the trends we were seeing around remote claims management, especially when it came to physical risks and using satellites and things. So overarching thought, everyone's talking more about digital, but frankly, have we really sort of embraced with it as a theme? Because it's all very well for a board to say, oh, we're on a digital transformation, but actually I think those people who were talking about it 18 months ago are absolutely accelerating, and those people who weren't talking about it, all they're doing now is talking about it. And so I think what COVID's done, if anything, is sort of start to differentiate the ones that were on a journey and the ones who hadn't quite got round to getting on their journey. And if I think about where we are at Brit, at one level we're doing the same as everyone else, simply saying, oh yes, digital transformation, that's the future, we've got to do it, we need to embrace technology, we need to embrace data. The reason I think we're ahead of a lot of our peers is, as well as the obvious things of calling digital a priority and saying, we need to understand what digital transformation means across the business, not just in any one area. We're actually saying, well, what about the cultural change? What is it that gets people who really haven't had to care about digital to start caring about it? How do we do that from the very top to the very bottom? We're hiring people now with titles such as engineer, such as UX designer, which were just not titles that were hired into commercial insurance a few years back. We're taking all the agile, which everyone's been talking about agile in IT for some years, and we're saying, what does that mean in a business context? And we're forcing business people to engage with it. We're taking external speakers from other industries to come in and talk about the topic. So, in terms of actual steps we've taken on Brits digital transformation, we're still at very early stages. But what we're realizing is if we don't build a culture and a foundation around it, then running a whole load of IT projects will be for nothing.
That's right. So I'm hearing there's been a real marked difference between the leads and the laggards in the market in terms of digital transformation, and steps are being taken to really embed a culture for digital transformation at Brits. And Adam, what do we see from our own London market survey, and does this resonate?
Thanks, Christine. The key point that Paolo made there is absolutely right. So we asked a question, whether the respondents' point of view on whether the greatest impact of COVID-19 will be accelerating that transition of the London market into a fully digital marketplace. And it was actually our most resounding agreed question there. So 98% of respondents agreed with that statement. So I think what that says is that absolutely at the moment it is very much front of mind for the market. I think when we then looked at some of the more qualitative feedback that came back from respondents, there are two aspects that stood out to me. I think one is getting a comprehensive view of what digital means in the London market, because I think there were, depending on who you talk to and depending on the respondents and their position within organisations and how and what they're responsible for, digital can mean anything from the placement of business. It can mean the middle and back office processing and the automation around that. It can be the ways of working, the networking, the collaborating side of things. So I think there's a real need to move more towards a consistent definition of what digital means across the market. And I think the second aspect, and there was a particular quote actually from a respondent that said, we have a number of very good examples of digital innovation in the market, but really it's pockets around the market, and actually expanding those pockets out to become more mainstream is the next step for the market. And I'm just wondering, in terms of people's perspectives, I wonder if, Paolo, in terms of the consistency of definition of digital, you might have a perspective on that, and then Sahil, you might also have a perspective on expanding out digital from pockets into wider mainstream activity. Should we do the first one first?
Yeah, so, I mean, just briefly, I mean, essentially, no, there's no standardized definition. We could all get to work on one, we'd all come up with something different. And the critical point is that we get from a place where people who aren't interested in are just saying, oh, you're bluffing, you're using buzzwords, to saying, look, I don't quite understand what digital means, but I get the point. Right. And I think that you're seeing a lot of people on that transition now, and about to flip from thinking that it's just a buzzword to realizing that they don't know what it is, but are comfortable with the fact that they need to. And so it takes us a bit back to digital culture. What's the point in having a nice definition of digital in the generic and putting that on everyone's screensaver? That's not the value. That's not the point. The point is saying, what does that mean in terms of the value it will bring to us? What value will it bring to our clients? And then obviously, what's the overall value for the market?
Thank you. And Sahil, what's your view on, how you move from pockets of digitization to becoming more organizational agility in terms of the wider organizational becoming digital effectively? What are you seeing in your own clients?
Yeah, so thanks, Christine. Taking a step back and a broader perspective, I think for years now, we have to recognize that digital businesses have disrupted industries. They've stolen market share and generated superior returns, whilst traditional incumbents have fought to reduce costs, digitize and transform. So digital has created polarity between winners and losers from the outset. And in a post-pandemic world, that divide has pretty much been catalyzed even further, and it's widened. A case in point is the fact that the market cap of digital natives such as Square, such as PayPal, is approximately double the likes of HSBC, Barclays, NatWest, and Lloyds combined, right? And that really highlights the performance gap that digital has created between kind of new entrants, new nimble digital entrants, and traditional incumbents. Now, at Baringa, we've got our 12 shifts of digital that outlines all the shifts that organizations are making to compete and thrive in a digital era. There's three, Christine, that I wanted to really highlight.
Sure.
Firstly, there's been a significant shift in the emergence of new digitally enabled business models. What we're seeing is that this has been done out of necessity as survival in response to COVID, but others have used the opportunity to unlock new revenue streams. So on one end of the spectrum, you've got TSB, who've optimized their business through digital. It's to digitize a large amount of their offline forms, creating a full online end-to-end journey. On the extreme end of the spectrum is Pret, right? So Pret has had to fundamentally pivot its business model in response to the pandemic. They've had to move to a subscription model for coffee. They've developed new revenue streams through partnerships with Deliveroo and Uber Eats. The business model shift has been profound in a COVID type catalyst. Secondly, there's been a big shift in getting the balance between digital and human right. So I guess moving forward, to thrive in this digital era, firms will need to rediscover their customers and gain a fresh understanding of what their customers' changed contexts, attitudes, and behaviors are. And the pandemic has raised everyone's digital expectations, but customers on the same hand still are craving that need to build empathy, build genuine relationships, and that human connection has never been more important. So it raises a few interesting questions. So how does your brand interact to provide a human touch? How do you better connect with the isolated? And the answer is not just purely digital. It's a balance. The last shift, I guess it's something that Adam spoke about earlier, was organizational agility. That's never been as paramount, particularly in the very volatile and uncertain world that we live in now. So what does that mean? Well, that means breaking down functional silos, organizing around customer. It means less hierarchy, less command and control, more experimentation, greater servant leadership, and a focus and a sharper focus on customer outcomes and the end-to-end journey. To Paolo's point, it also means new types of talent, right? So experienced architects, product owners, full stack developers, and less of your kind of waterfall-y project managers. I think those three shifts, in summary, Christine: business model, getting the balance right between digital and human, and then reorganizing for organizational agility is kind of key. And I think it resonates and it backs up some of the results in the survey.
Yes, in fact, I was going to tie us back to the London market, and I'm just reflecting on some of the ways of doing business before the pandemic and post the pandemic. So PPL and the digitization of the binding of the of risks was something that moved from 67% to over 90% overnight, as underwriters and brokers had to do business in an intermediated, fully automated manner. So your point, Sahil, around operating model changes and how do you retain that intimacy with the client is really resonates with the challenges we're facing in the London market today, on how does the broker retain that primacy and that intimacy with the client while doing business electronically. And I guess it's a nice segue into a spotlight on Key, something that yourselves have launched, Paolo, just pre-pandemic, a pure digital follower syndicate. Could you share your insights on the challenges you faced in launching this digital business adoption, and how some of the key successes that you're now seeing on the adoption of Key?
Sure, absolutely. And I think, it's worth putting in context the fact, as you say, that this was a project that was already in motion pre-pandemic. And, and I think most of the learnings and challenges, in fact, that I'll share in a moment are not pandemic related. So therefore they are of use as everyone's reflecting on how they might go through similar journeys. So, I mean, I think from a headline point of view, just to remind people, the aim of Key is to be a follow syndicate in the London market, but it's the first one that from the sort of the very heart of its DNA is digitally focused, it's algorithmically driven, and the aim therefore is to give a service to the broker that is different. And so, from a success point of view, we're still very much at the beginning of the journey, but we are absolutely on track to meet the 2022 Lloyd's business plan. And so, we're comfortable if we're thinking both in terms of business targets, sort of financial targets, but also change targets. The financial targets absolutely going to plan. I think what's working well. It's more engaging for the broker. That the positioning very much was, we want this to be a better service for you, broker, and ultimately, therefore, for your client, rather than, hey, we've got some new shiny products. There's absolutely space for product innovation in the London market. That was not the route that we were taking with Key. It was a service focus. What do we say to the brokers? We understood their pain points. We said, okay, therefore, how about speed? So now getting a line from Key takes minutes rather than hours or days. It's done totally electronically. So, there is no need for them to queue up anywhere. It's a data-led process. It's not document-led, which plays, I think, to the overall aspirations of the market, but we're getting there from the beginning. And ultimately, all of this costs less. It costs less to run as a syndicate. It costs less for the broker because he or she is spending less time. Their organization, in some cases, can link directly. So, there's not even a need to email information over. There's direct linkages. So, what's not to like, right? That's all great. Now, what about the challenges? That type of user change is very difficult, and and this is where actually the pandemic is interesting, because it is hard to separate out where we were helped by the pandemic because suddenly people weren't able to go face to face or not, but certainly the fact that someone now needs to interact differently to the way they have for 5 or 10 years is a challenge. And even if someone wants to change their behavior, it's still a challenge. So the inertia of moving beyond those sort of people who are always up for a little bit of change into the mass of individuals who are more change resistant was tricky. Another challenge, which people might not imagine, is actually one around talent, because yes, as well as the underwriting talent, which it's relatively easy to get in the market, you have got to bring in engineering talent. And bringing engineering talent into the London insurance market is not easy. However much you sort of wrap it up and say, look, this is different. And so that was absolutely a challenge. And also persuading the underwriting talent to get excited around something that was new rather than stick to the old models they were doing. So a range of challenges. I think we overcome it by inherently being centered around what did the broker want, and that was how we were differentiating ourselves. And then I think the final point is also just constantly getting feedback, constantly iterating, and we'll get in a minute, I'm sure, to the point around legacy systems. But when you're building something from scratch, you can do it in a way that allows you to respond very rapidly. To Sahil's language, he mentioned I think PayPal and a couple of others as being nimble operators. It's very difficult for any London insurer to be nimble when it comes to technology. If you're building something from scratch with the view to wanting to be nimble, that's far easier.
And David, from a data perspective, and we mentioned, bringing engineering talent in and analytics as driving some of the new modern digital operating models. What do you see are these coming challenges that you see other clients in the London market and wider facing into?
Yeah, I mean, I think the focus on talent is a good point to make. There are a finite number of people available in the market who have the expertise, the experience, and the talent to do some of the things that leading edge organisations want to take on. So that is not to be underestimated. I think when it comes to dealing with kind of legacy technology, again, as Paolo kind of pointed out, those can often be, to use the sort of technical / non-technical term, bundles of mud. They are big lumps of technology which are very difficult to change in any kind of meaningful or iterative way without replacing the whole thing wholesale. So that inevitably makes it difficult for organizations to update what they can do, whilst they retain those systems. And of course, if they're using, standard industry components, they're only ever going to be as fast as the rest of the industry or as fast as the software vendor wants to go. So I think that is a major challenge. And of course, a lot of those systems were not built with the kind of level of analytics that we want to do today in mind. So they don't produce the raw ingredients that are required to do the analysis or to build the models that are going to be differentiating. So yeah, starting from a position where you're dealing with legacy is definitely less preferable than starting with a nice green field, that's for sure.
Thank you, David. And moving us on into the next question around, does digital innovation truly drive down operating costs? So lowering the costs of doing business is one of the key priorities for our London market clients that we've identified in the survey. Adam, could you share maybe a few insights on our client priorities and whether there is a linkage that we've seen come through loud and clear in our survey findings between digitization and operating cost reduction?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you say, Christine, expense reduction still very high on the agenda of everyone in the market. I mean, we asked respondents what they saw as their main challenges in this current year, but also over a 3 to 5 year time frame, and it's obviously useful to compare those two sets of responses. And I think in the current year challenges, cost reduction was the fourth most frequently mentioned challenge, behind COVID and the sort of macroeconomic conditions. And the other aspect that probably ranked slightly above it in the current market was passing on some of the rate increases to clients and brokers, was obviously some of the challenging conversations that are being had around that. And then I think in the 3 to 5 year time frame, we're looking at it becoming even more important. So I think there's definitely a trend there where actually people are seeing it both in the short term, but also very much in the long term as the need to create a sustainable cost base within the market. And I think in terms of the things that people are investing in, I think it's something that highlighted as a challenge that people are still very much still grappling with. I mean, we asked respondents what their big bets in terms of investments were going to be over the next 2 to 3 years, and it's fair to say that the top 5 sort of chunks of activity all had a strong cost reduction or a simplification component to them. So these are things like modernizing the technology estate, building more modern data warehousing and data capture technology, process automation, and obviously the thing that we tend to deal with quite frequently at Baringa, sort of operating models and organization design. So it's very much high on the agenda, both from a need in the C-suite to remain focused on it, but also from an investment perspective. So it's absolutely a key theme across the market.
Thank you, Adam. And are these priorities that are London Market Survey respondents similar to the ones at Brit in your operations role, Paolo? And going back to the question, are you seeing results being reaped now from the digitization agenda that you're embarking on at Brit?
Yes, I mean, it's an incredibly priority question for everyone. I mean, essentially, everyone wants to get their combined ratio down, not least, but if there's low investment returns. And also, I think the market as a whole is aware of sort of the growing realization, maybe from clients, about quite how much is lost in terms of the overall expense ratio, rather than going out in claims payments. And I think Brit, we have exactly the sort of same view as the rest of the market there. Partly there's the ever there challenge that the expense ratio and the direct control of the carriers versus the acquisition part of it is the amount we can actually control is relatively small. Now, if we can, as per what we said about Key earlier, if we can make the process more straightforward for the broker and therefore the broker's costs go down, then that is obviously helpful from an overall sort of market cost point of view. I think that the overall message to my mind, however, is that no one's saving any meaningful money in the near term through digital transformation. If it's pretty hard to see a case, unless you're operating an incredibly inefficient business, that you can make any meaningful savings in the short term for two reasons. One is most of this digital transformation work, even if you can do little bits at a time, the real change, which is driving down the relative people costs compared to premium that you're writing, that's going to take time. The other point is it's going to require a decent amount of investment, right? If even as simple as building a data lake or replatforming something, even before you start getting into sophisticated algorithms or wholesale changes of your data management function or whatever it may be, all of this stuff costs money. So I think whilst it's entirely appropriate for a COO or a head of transformation to be tasked with writing a business case that shows cost savings, the reality is that the real impact in the near term has to be about how we're able to essentially handle risks smarter and satisfy customers better. And if we're doing those things, then that's what will allow everyone to be confident the digital transformation makes sense. And then over time, we should move to a lower cost base where, ultimately what will drive it will be that the teams at the front of the business, the combination of the underwriters and the data analytics teams, will be able to write more premium for the same number of people. But that will take time. And so anyone who's trying to drive a cost saving story on a digital transformation, I think is going to have some tricky years ahead of them.
Makes sense. So short-term investments to be able to realize the long-term gains, both financial and customer benefits and growth agenda. And is that something that resonates, Sahil, in your experience outside the London market and the broader insurance industry? Is this what digital levers are customers pulling to reduce their operational cost base? And again, do you see the same short-term investments required before you can realize the gains?
Yeah, absolutely, Christine. So I think delivering sustainable reductions in the operational cost base is, I guess, through digital, as Paolo rightly says, it's about long-term execution. All organizations, to some degree, use digital to increase operational efficiency and drive within a cost base. Whilst the intent is there, the delivery is often lacking. Based on what we see across various industries and organizations, there are two broad levers to reduce the operational cost base. The first is reducing the cost to serve. For many years, organizations have been automating manual processes through kind of digital platforms, which helps reduce handoffs and unlocks siloed data in backend systems. So whilst that helps reduce operational costs through quicker processing times, and in some industries like banking, capital markets, it actually helps error rates and therefore reduce regulatory fines. The more leading organizations, from a digital sophistication perspective, take this further. So that means leveraging robotics, intelligent automation, so back office costs not only reduced, but also the cost of serving the customer at the point of contact is reduced. So things like conversational AI in chatbots mean that there is a capability that can generate human-like interactions at a fraction of the cost. So to make this a bit more real, in the average UK contact center, the cost to serve via phone call is roughly £3.78 versus a live chat, which is at roughly £2. So a big way to reduce cost to serve is enabling that shift to lower cost channels and reducing avoidable contact altogether. So that's kind of cost to serve. The second lever that we've touched upon earlier is also cost to change. So traditional organizations often have very complex tech stack. I think David alluded to it as as piles of mud, really, which means that any outage in a part of a stack means that multiple systems are taken down, and it takes significant financial resources and time to drive change. So I guess in response, what we see is that the more sophisticated digital organizations have recognized this, and they've modernized their tech stack away from large monolithic systems to more microservices based on the cloud. And these microservices, I guess at a high level, they are loosely coupled. So what that means is that it helps reduce the cost of change by making sure that things are not intertwined. It reduces shorter release cycles and development cycles. So for digital natives who didn't have to really face complex legacy tech, the likes of Netflix, Amazon, they've gone from monthly release cycles to releasing updates multiple times a day. So I guess, Christine, in summary, there are two key levers by which digital plays a role in kind of reducing the operational cost base. Firstly, optimizing cost to serve, and then secondly, optimizing cost to change. Key differentiator, as Paolo mentioned earlier, is the quality of long-term execution and getting that longer-term senior leadership commitment as well.
Thank you, Sahil. And I think you touched upon a really interesting topic there around cost of change and the legacy tech versus the nimbler, clean sheet digital native organizations. And I guess in the London market, just to tie that back in, we also have, the large incumbents versus the fintechs, the insurtechs, the smaller, nimbler organizations. I guess a question around legacy tech and data, and really, can legacy tech be digitized, or is there infrastructure and platform replacement the only solution? And what are those challenges that we see? I will ask David to the first question around, from your experience in insurance, David, and some of the larger insurers versus the nimbler insurers. What data strategies and Baringa has helped the clients implement to really extract data from legacy tech? And what are the challenges you see in organizations doing that? And whereas, what are the key success factors in your view?
Yeah, there's a few things in there. I think if you have a legacy piece of technology, I guess you've kind of got operational systems and data systems. You've got the systems that you use to support your workflow or whatever processes that you're running, and then the systems in which you store data to do analysis or other sort of maybe kind of offline processes where you're trying to kind of get to the root cause of why something is working the way it is. I think taking the latter of those first, clearly, unpicking a data system which is poorly architected or structured in a way which isn't suitable for the analysis that you want to do is challenging and requires quite a lot of effort to unpick. But it's not as challenging as actually trying to replace an operational system on which your business and the sort of the processes that it runs depends. So one of the strategies that we've recommended, again, to the point that Sahil was making, is you slowly kind of eat into the functionality that is provided by those operational systems over time by building out, smaller components, smaller services, which can take on some of the functionality that's delivered by that operational system. So rather than like a wholesale, lift and shift and replacement, you can sort of start to eat into, as I say, the functionality they provide by building other services. So that is definitely a potential approach. But again, to the point we were making earlier, fundamentally, if you are dealing with legacy, there will be a tipping point at which it's easier to start from scratch, and it's easier to kind of build something afresh and then transition over to that over time, rather than trying to as I say, evolve it. So, yeah, different approaches for different situations, basically.
Thank you, David. And Paolo, again, keen to understand from an operational point of view at Brit, how you've approached this perennial challenge of extracting data from legacy versus trying and moving things in a piecemeal approach, operational systems, to David's point. What challenges have you faced, and how do you go about this data extraction challenge?
Sure, absolutely. So, I mean, I think, yeah, we have to remind ourselves that in the grand scheme of data volumes, the London market is not dealing with sort of unfathomable volumes of data. And certainly, Sir Hill and David will both know from other industries where, literally the physical size of what needs to be extracted and moved makes it a challenge in a way that we will never have in the London market. So, we have one advantage already to start. I think a lot of the challenge we've still got in the London market is more a mindset one than a technical one, because actually we are not sophisticated users of our data. And so, the question of which data would you want to move, or, if you've got data that's sort of stuck in a legacy system where it's hard to access, which bits of that would you like to make easier to access? The first question has to be, which data are we deriving value from? And if I think about sort of the insurtech revolution of the last few years, and in most ways that has been a positive thing for the market. One of the maybe slightly less positive is that it's put all sorts of emphasis on new data, external data, data enrichment, data enhancement, data augmentation, go buy this new data set to derive more value. When actually what almost every insurer needs to be doing, and this is certainly a priority of ours at Brit, is saying, are we sure we're deriving the maximum value from the data we already have? Now, it's a lot less sort of flag wavy and exciting to say, hey, our project to derive 3% more value from our current data is now complete, compared to, going out and partnering with some sort of cool new data supplier and saying, look, we've got this new data. However, the reality is there's so much that can be done with what we've got rather than bringing more in, that we should be starting there. And if you have that discussion inside properly, then two things can happen. One is you can derive more value from your current data, and then any discussion about how to move it around is easier to have because it's a value discussion, rather than what David will have seen dozens of times with clients is, someone saying, oh, we've got to move all this data from legacy systems, current systems. Someone says, what value does that bring? And it's like, well, it's really hard to articulate, but it would be a risk if we left it behind. We should move it. And then they play the whole risk discussion. If you can show a value discussion, then the investment's easier. And I think what also happens is that it sort of plays to the overall data culture story, which again, it's a cliche, it's a buzzword, but the data culture has to be the one that it has to be what's sitting there if it allows individuals to say, okay, we're not quite sure about the quality of this data, or this may be where we want to add a bit more, or what, I just know that of that 20-year data set, frankly, the last 5 or 6 years worth of data are great, and everything beyond that we don't need to worry. And you're going to get more of a better answer from the gut feel of someone who knows the data than bringing in a half a dozen analysts who will then, run through all this data and do regressions to show when the data was last accessed and all that. So, what's at the heart of how we're working on the whole data front is saying, right, how can we get the people who use data to really want to use all of our data internally rather than maybe just some bits of it? And how can we get people who aren't currently sort of data infused to be much more sort of engaged with the data? And so we've been talking about digital up until now. They're two sides of the same coin. No one's going to have a successful digital transformation if they don't change the data mindset of their teams, and there's a limit to what you can do with your data if you're not doing digital. Right,
that's a very insightful way of looking at the data transformation challenge. David, is deriving value top of mind in most of our clients, or is this a common what are the common pitfalls to avoid in terms of data transformation programs that you're seeing?
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head. I think one of the things that a lot of clients we've seen where they may have gone wrong is focusing on building some technology or hiring some people, and doing so in the absence of a really clear understanding of the value that they are going to deliver from their data. So we believe in obviously developing a data strategy which should articulate the value that you're going to deliver, but then also specifically when it comes to the implementation of that strategy, having a value-led approach. So never getting too far ahead of yourself and sort of getting overexcited about the technology you're building, but always let's say on a periodic basis, which could be anywhere from 2 to 12 weeks, making sure that the thing that you're working towards delivers really tangible value that you can articulate back to somebody in the business that they understand. So, I'm going to reduce that cost by 10%. I'm going to increase conversion by, 15% or whatever it might happen to be. So, and if you build a program around those outcomes, not only do you keep yourself honest, you keep the attention of the rest of the organization. And we often talk about the need to build capability, i.e., the technology, the people, the data assets, at the same time as building credibility. So keeping yourself credible with the rest of the business by virtue of the value that you're delivering back to them. So any good data transformation will have both of those things front of mind throughout its journey.
Great, thank you. And Adam, final question on data. From our London Market Survey findings, what are the top challenges relating to data transformation and data mining effectively? And is it more of a resource challenge? Is it capability? What are the things that our clients are worried about that has come through loud and clear from our survey?
Yeah, sure. So for the survey results on this one, I think the interesting insight is when you look back at our previous survey results and compare them to now. So we did our previous survey 3 years ago based on data from the previous year. So it's almost 4 years old now in terms of the responses. I think what came out of that survey sort of 3/4 years ago was when we asked people what they were focusing on in terms of improving their data capability, it was quite a dispersed set of responses. And some of those responses varied from, data visualization tools, analytics, data enrichment from external sources. And I think there was a bit of some of the responses were a little bit scattergun. I think if you were to kind of categorize them, I think what we've seen in this year's survey, which is quite an interesting shift, is a real, what I would term sort of back to basics approach. So there's sort of three things highlighted by respondents, and the results are much more focused in those areas. I mean, we had 27% of respondents said that they are focusing on data quality as their number one priority, and sort of within that as a subcategory, looking at particularly the delegated authority area, which is known as a particular pain point in that regard. We had 20% of respondents said that they were looking at automating the way that they extract and use the data from their old legacy technology. So I think talking to that point that David and Paolo were both making around accessibility of that data and how to get hold of it and use it in an efficient way. And the third point that came out was around building less of a, I would term it sort of the whizzy gadgets dashboard that is sort of looking at a number of different components, but actually making a small number of focused, trusted business dashboards that you can run your business from. So overall, I think there's definitely an element of moving towards a longer term data capability and platform, rather than, as I say, this sort of more whizzy scattergun approach, I think is my reading of the data this year.
Thank you. And Paolo, does this resonate with yourselves at Brit?
Yeah, it does. I'd love to build on a couple of Adam's points. So, his final one was on sort of some trusted dashboards. I think what I'm about to say is obvious, but not everyone's doing it, right? Which is that you can get a good sort of MI analytics team to come up with quite a good dashboard, which will answer some of the business's questions, right? But actually, these things work best as they sort of iterate and improve. And, the best thing to do is not to hold 100 workshops and then have a dashboard that's sort of 85% good enough. It's to come out rapidly with something that's, good enough to be used. And then someone will say in a meeting, oh, it'd be great if it did that, or what about this, or what about that? And then, in the normal way, you sort of prioritize, you manage your backlog, and you're constantly improving it. So, I would absolutely echo Adam's point that people, providing they've got the very basics right, assuming they've got beyond that, they should absolutely be going out there to the business with these dashboards, getting people to use them, and then learning from that, rather than spending too long worrying about trying to issue the perfect thing. Now, all that is predicated on having a hygiene level of data quality and data accessibility. If there's any single thing I want at a market level from all this discussion about digital, it has got to be that we solve some of these problems centrally, because we are spending millions as individual companies, as suppliers, as a marketplace, building extraction and data quality management tools for data that at source is good. It's just one of these bizarre things that is accepted in the London market, that will take data that is good at source, and then through various steps we turn it into data that is either inadequate from a quality point of view or is not immediately accessible, and then we have to build these fantastic AI tools, extraction engines, whatever it might be, to do it. So hopefully we can get to a place where that data is flowing through far more seamlessly, and then absolutely all of us benefit.
Thank you. And one final question to all our attendees. Thinking about the London market and the future of the London market, there is a lot of ambition in the market to go digital, to transform, to access data. What would you think, knowing the London market and knowing the insurance industry as a whole, some of the ambitions we have to that have been declared by Lloyd's, what do you think organizations should focus on? What would be the one point that you would call out is the key get right, if you were to leave a final leaving note of what organizations in the London market should be focusing on to be more digital and data enabled? What would that be, David?
Commit to it. Stop talking about it and commit to doing it would be my advice. There's nothing beats actually making progress and delivering on your promises. So I would say, get on with it and reap the rewards. Great,
love that. Sahil, from a digital angle, what would be one thing that you think insurers in the London market should be focusing on to get right?
It's very similar to David. I think the common thread between data and digital transformation is that securing that upfront and strong leadership commitment and providing a very clear North Star. I think that is a non-negotiable for any successful transformation, and making sure that digital doesn't live in any business unit or isn't siloed, that it is end-to-end across the organization and front to back.
Right. Paolo?
I would absolutely agree on those, and I would throw in the word culture, because of course that's how these things change. It is a digital culture, a data culture, which requires leadership from the top. It requires role modeling. It requires it to be an end-to-end. Everyone's in this together, and there's no way that any company is going to individually be successful unless they create a digital and data culture.
Right, thank you. Adam?
So I think my one is along the similar lines to Paolo, and it was mentioned earlier on in the talk as well around talent. I mean, we had one of our survey questions was around, are you able to recruit the right talent to be able to deliver on some of these changes? And 80% of respondents disagreed that they were able to do that at the moment. So I think there's definitely something, and it tees up our next webinar that we're going to be doing in a couple of months' time, around the talent proposition in the London market and how you recruit and how you retain the people with the skills you need in order to be able to deliver the things you need to be able to deliver, that we've spoken about here today. So I think that is absolutely a really critical aspect that we need to move forward.
Great parting thoughts. Thank you everyone for your time today, and indeed watch the space for our next webinar on future of London markets, talent agenda and talent acquisition. So thank you everyone for your time, and I hope you enjoy the podcast.